Welcome back to Decode Healthcare with Harshal. Now, in part 18, we tackled alphanumeric code ranges, but today, we're on a brand new mission. We are diving deep into section IB4 of the CMS ICD-10 CM official guidelines. We're going to master the fine line between coding a patient's symptoms versus their definitive diagnosis. Let's learn exactly how to avoid the dangerous double coding trap.
So ask yourself, when does coding a patient's pain actually become a compliance violation? Well, coding both a definitive diagnosis and its inherent symptoms might feel like you're just being incredibly thorough with a chart, but honestly, it's a huge trap. It artificially inflates claims and triggers some pretty aggressive automated payer audits.
To keep your data impeccably clean, here is our game plan for this explainer. First, the symptom coding trap. Then, we'll define the golden rules, break down when symptoms are forbidden versus when they're mandatory, cover the outpatient exception, and finally, wrap up with your crucial compliance takeaways.
All right, part 1, the symptom coding trap.
There is a really common misconception out there that more codes equals better documentation. Actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite here. Overcoding symptoms alongside a definitive diagnosis makes your documentation non-compliant. It directly violates the core principles of data integrity. When you slap symptom codes onto a definitive diagnosis that inherently already includes them, you're creating a messy, inflated claim that auditors absolutely love to target.
Moving right along to section 2, defining the golden rules.
The absolute most crucial takeaway from section IB4 is this: symptom codes are your fallback. They are totally acceptable for reporting, but only when a definitive diagnosis has not been established by the end of the encounter. Simply put, if you don't have that final definitive answer from the provider, that's when you code the symptoms.
And this brings us to a really brilliant concept, the integral condition. Think of it like this. An integral condition is a sign or symptom you would completely expect a patient with a specific disease to have. It's essentially baked right into the disease process itself. Which perfectly segues into section 3, when symptoms are forbidden. This is our first foundational law of symptom coding. According to section IB5, the guidelines strictly forbid you from coding an integral symptom separately once the provider has established a definitive diagnosis. If that symptom is routinely associated with the disease, it's already covered by the main diagnosis code.
Let's put this into perspective with a clinical example. Say a patient is diagnosed with acute appendicitis. They obviously are going to have severe abdominal pain, right? So you code the appendicitis, but if you add a separate code for that abdominal pain, no way. That is a massive compliance violation. Just imagine a giant red X slashing right through that pain code on the chart. Integral symptoms mean do not code them separately.
Is the exact same logic here. If the definitive diagnosis is pneumonia, you absolutely do not code the cough and the fever. Why? Because respiratory distress, coughing, and fevers are routinely associated with the pneumonia disease process. To stay perfectly compliant, just code the pneumonia.
All right, section 4, when symptoms are mandatory. Let's look at law 2, which is the flip side of the coin.
Section IB6 lays it out clearly. You must code a symptom if it is completely unrelated or not routinely expected with a patient's primary diagnosed disease. If a symptom is distinct and it requires its own separate clinical evaluation or management, it definitely earns its own code. For instance, if a patient has cirrhosis of the liver and also presents with ascites, you code both. Ascites, which is fluid buildup in the abdomen, is not a guaranteed integral part of cirrhosis. Because it's not routinely associated with every single case and often needs distinct management, you are mandated to assign an additional code for it.
Next up, section 5, the outpatient exception. Let's talk about how this rule shifts in outpatient settings.
This is a massive distinction you absolutely have to remember. In inpatient coding, you might sometimes code a rule-out condition as if it already exists. But outpatient coders, we cannot do that. In the outpatient world, you do not code probable, suspected, or rule-out diagnoses as definitive.
So if a patient leaves a clinic and the chart ends with something like suspected pneumonia or fever of unknown origin, you follow a strict process. Search for the definitive diagnosis. Since it's unconfirmed, you identify the presenting symptoms instead and assign those Chapter 18 R-Series symptom codes. Basically, if there's no definitive diagnosis, getting that green checkmark of approval, you code the symptom.
Here is a quick logic cheat sheet for you. No definitive diagnosis?
code the presenting symptoms. If the symptom is not integral to the disease, you code the diagnosis and the symptom. But if that symptom is integral to the disease, you code the diagnosis only. It's that straightforward.
Finally, Section 6, Final Compliance Takeaways. Let's lock in these rules so your claims stay impeccably clean.
Remember, overcoding symptoms is a massive red flag for automated billing scrubbers. If a system spots a redundant symptom code sitting right next to a definitive diagnosis, it's going to pop up an error box and flag your claim. So, let the CMS guidelines be your ultimate source of truth. Never code integral symptoms of a definitive diagnosis. Code symptoms only if they're unconfirmed or completely unrelated. And as always, if the documentation leaves you guessing, query your provider.
So ask yourself this, are your records reflecting the true definitive diagnosis, or are you still falling into the double coding trap? Mastering these clinical relationships is absolutely crucial for compliant coding. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment down below if this helps clear things up for you. Get ready for Part 20, where we'll dive even deeper into Sections IB5 and IB6, continuing our masterclass on clinical relationships. See you in the next one.